Hey friends, it's Zach. This week, we are reaching into our archives to share one of my favorite episodes from Season 2. We're bringing this one back because it seeks to answer the single most common question anyone seems to have about Friends. What do Quakers believe? If you're new to the podcast or new to Quakerism, this is the perfect place to start. And if you're a longtime friend, then you know just how complicated and beautifully diverse the answer to that question really is. This episode, originally produced by Georgia Sparling, gathers a wide range of voices to explore what unites Quakers across the globe and what makes them unique. What I love most about this episode is how Georgia pushes past the obvious discomfort that this question elicits and draws out these deep and simple truths from her guests. It is a powerful reminder of what's essential, and I am so glad to share it with you again.
We believe there's no difference between the sacred and the secular. There's no division. We believe in continuing revelation, which is why we don't have a creed, because we might believe tomorrow something we didn't believe yesterday. And that all life is sacramental, that all humans are equal, and all life forms are connected. Those are the things that I think of as what we have in common.
The
Quaker
podcast.
Story, spirit, sound.
I'm Georgia Sparling.
And I'm John Watts.
And today we're asking the question that probably every single Quaker gets asked at least a few times in their life. What do Quakers believe? If you Google Quakers, this is the first question that many people seem to be asking. So I'll pose it to you. How often do you get this question, John?
I mean, basically never. But
Wrong answer.
So maybe I'm the wrong test subject. I mean, it's likely because I live in Philadelphia, where most everyone here has encountered Friends at some point in their life. I do know from my many years of making online Quaker media that belief is how many people seek to understand a religion. Like, that's the first question you might ask when you're trying to wrap your mind around it. And one of the magical and maybe frustrating things about Quakerism is that it's sometimes difficult to put us in a box that way. You know, the founders of Quakerism were clear that they were throwing out lots of elements of the established church, including a focus on belief or creeds. Instead, they established what became a much more experiential religion, which can be mystical and also makes us difficult to nail down, especially if your first question is, what do you believe?
So no easy answer, maybe no answer at all to this question, which I think for many Quakers is freeing. But yeah, for those of us who are not Quakers, as you say, it is difficult to wrap our minds around it. As I've learned so far, most Quakers do believe in God, though some people really don't like using that word and instead prefer something like light or spirit or the divine. The majority of Quakers would identify as Christians, though, again, there are very different understandings of what that means. And then there are theists, and there's non-theist Quakers, and there are Quakers who simultaneously practice other belief systems. So it's confusing.
Yeah, so I grew up in an unprogrammed Quaker meeting with lots of theological diversity. And the joke was sort of, as kids, that we would get our religious education kind of like through osmosis. I can't say that was entirely successful, and I was relieved later on as a college student when I learned that Quakerism, at least in the beginning, had a clear understanding of like who we are and what we stand for. But I do look back on that upbringing fondly. Anyway, I understand that it's a challenging assignment. Georgia, anything you want to share about how you approached this episode?
My approach was to pose this question to a lot of friends, as many as I could find. and to speak to people from different Quaker branches. So I didn't get to them all, of course, but I got a good variety of perspectives. So today I'm going to share as many of those answers as I can. And we're also going to slow down and hear from one particularly weighty friend, to use some Quaker lingo. And then we'll finish up by hearing how the British yearly meeting is thinking about their Quaker faith and practice.
All right. Sounds like a solid start. Let's get into it.
I recently traveled to the American Midwest, where I sat down with quite a few Quakers and asked them not only what Quakers believe, but how the diversity of belief works in a community. Here's what they had to say.
When people ask me the question, what do Quakers believe? My response is always, which group of Quakers are you talking about?
Here's Tom Ham, who recently retired from more than 30 years of teaching at Earlham College, where he was director of special collections. I asked Tom to help me answer this question because I knew as a Quaker historian, he would have a unique perspective.
Even among American friends who today are a minority of the world's Quakers, you would find the whole span of the American religious spectrum. Everyone from the most Bible-thumping, Donald Trump-loving, fundamentalist, Christian nationalist, to the most universalist, left-wing, chain yourself to the nuclear missile as a protest sort of activist. I think that the keynote in understanding American Quaker history has been the development of diversity over the past 2 centuries. I think the roots of that diversity lie in the fact that when you look at primitive Quakerism, 17th century Quakerism, there is a variety of ideas like the inward light or direct revelation or the ministry of all believers that are reasonably susceptible to a variety of interpretations. And the varying beliefs you find among American Quakers today, you can find roots for that in 17th century Quakerism.
Tom has been a friend his whole life, but my next guest is a young Quaker and a rising senior at Earlham College who I met while attending Ohio Valley Yearly Meeting, which was a first for both of us. Theodore grew up in New England and came from a Unitarian background, but found a home in Quakerism while at Earlham. We have an episode coming up, What Do Quakers Believe? So as somebody newer to the Religious Society of Friends, like, how do you answer that question?
I would say that there isn't really anything that fully binds us together besides the idea that, like, there is light in everybody. There is something divine. There is that of God, however you want to phrase it. I think the fact that there is like 20 different ways to phrase that one idea is just kind of exemplary of how diverse Quaker thought really is.
So if someone asked you, as a Quaker, what do you believe? How do you answer that?
Well, I know I don't answer it the same way every time.
That's Stephanie Crumbling Effinger, a recorded minister, former Earlham School of Religion professor, and a member of West Richmond Friends in Richmond, Indiana, which is a semi-program meeting. I spoke with her on a bench on Earlham's campus, so you might hear a few birds in the background on this one.
Worship is the center for me of being a Quaker. And that sense of coming together in the presence of God and one another and seeking to be listening and to be real. For me, being a friend is less about a set of beliefs, although those are really important, like that God is available to each person, that we each have this capacity to experience the holy and to listen and to speak from that, even to act from that, and not just Quakers, but everybody. And that such a big part of why we come together in worship is to do that, listening together and to nurture the capacity in one another and celebrate it and seek to enrich it, deepen it.
Is there one thing that all Quakers believe?
Not that I've discovered. we have diverged in so many different ways, although sometimes something is a divergence and then there's also a converging on some things, so it's not always neat and tidy. Like I had the idea, for example, that Northwest Yearly Meeting, out in the Pacific Northwest, well, they're evangelical, and so they must be even more so than the Indiana Yearly Meeting friends with whom I often wrestled so much.
Stephanie says that she had some misconceptions about what these Quakers believe, and she also assumed that they would have no silence in their meetings.
Oh, that is so not the case. So that would be an example where I got really humbled. It does get really challenging when we bear this common name of friends, but sometimes it's hard to find much that we have in common until we start, really listening. We can often find more than is visible, but the differences are real in some excruciating ways as well.
How friends embrace and live with those differences is something that I keep trying to understand. I asked Elizabeth Turney about it. She's also an Earlamite, having just completed her master's degree in divinity at Earlham School of Religion. So if someone says, what do Quakers believe? What do you say to them?
I usually start with the foundation of there's that of God in everyone. Though there are some non-theist Quakers who would probably replace that statement some way, that there's that of goodness in everyone or something like that.
Does that fundamentally change it, though?
Yes. It does for me. But I think that's one of the interesting things about liberal Quakerism is we've made space for non-theists to join our meetings, to join our annual gatherings, to be a part of our community. But it is a distinct theological difference. And I love that diversity, but it does cause conflict. It causes sometimes difficulties in business meeting when you're trying to find the sense of a meeting and people, what do they define that as meaning if you're not talking about a divine guidance towards some kind of conclusion?
Mm-hmm. I mean, is there anybody you can say that, like, they say, I'm a Quaker, and you say, no, you're not? Is there ever a time when that argument could be made?
It's interesting because I spent a lot of time in seminary thinking about this. What makes a Quaker? Because I was looking at Kenyan Quakers, very different from, U.S. and British Quakers, looking at the difference between evangelical Quakers and liberal Quakers, and there being more of a list of beliefs, a creed in the evangelical Quakers' websites, and they, sign documents saying this is what we believe. They have doctrine of faith. And I'm like, well, that's not my definition of Quaker. And so what is the unifying principle? And I used to think it was the way we did business process. But I have found that in Kenya, that is different. They don't necessarily do it the same way we do. I used to think it was that of God in everyone, but then, as we discussed, the non-theists, they don't necessarily believe there is that of God in everyone. And so when it comes down to it, what makes a Quaker is very amorphous. But I would never want to say to someone who says they're a Quaker, well, no, you're not, because there's something about the ethos of Quakerism that is appealing to them, that is calling to that, which I would call that of God in them, and says, this is home to me. And congratulations, you found your spiritual home. I'm happy for you.
While there may be no defined creed, there does seem to be a common belief in peace, though how that's implemented is different for every Quaker. What do you believe as a Quaker? If somebody asks you, how do you answer that question?
Yeah, I chuckled because I just got that question from a young woman.
Nancy McCormick is often asked the What Do Quakers Believe question by students at Wilmington College. Nancy co-pastors 2 meetings with her husband Mike, Chester Friends Meeting and Springfield Friends Meeting. She's also the chaplain at Wilmington College, which is where we met up.
I believe in a loving creator who wants us to figure out how to love one another. And for me, it is the experience of the Christ, who I have had a personal experience with and do on a regular basis. My belief, my Quaker belief, is one of peace. We have to stop killing one another. We have to quit dropping bombs on one another. Physical bombs, emotional bombs, spiritual bombs. That we are here to build the kingdom of God on earth while we are here. I am greatly convinced that I am to make a difference while I am here. And that means that big 4-letter word, love. And to give people a place to breathe, to let go of the angst that troubles me, that troubles them, and to sit and let God lead us, guide us as we walk alongside.
Ooh, we have taken in a lot of different ideas and perspectives in a relatively short amount of time. So how about taking a couple of seconds to take a deep breath and consider what you've heard? And then we'll be back after this break to hear how one longtime friend reconciles some of these differences in faith, language, and belief.
I recently had the pleasure to connect with Adria DeCapua, one of the teachers from School of the Spirit. She's currently co-teaching a unique hybrid program called God's Promise Fulfilled, Encountering and Embodying Grace in the Shadow of Empire. They are in the first year of this program, and registration is open now for year 2, which begins in May. I asked her why she thought this class was important right now.
We all know it's a mess. Everybody, ask anybody. Literally any person on the street, no matter what country, politics, education, we all know it's a mess. Once you get to about 14, 15, you can tell it's a mess, but that God's in it with us. And having those two things together, just how big of a mess we're in, and also that we're not alone in it, I think, at least for me, has been transformative, and I think for some of our participants as well.
So here's the structure. 2 years. Inhale and exhale.
In year 1, we are inhaling the reality of the promise that in an atmosphere of fear and scarcity, that there is abundance. Not abundance the way that empire sees abundance, extraction, ease, leisure at the expense of others. But it's an abundance that comes from God and from our own yielding of our need to be right and on top, that comes from our willingness to forgive and to love and be generous.
And year 2?
The exhale is, how do we then live into that in the world? So the exhale is exploring the unique calls to action and to being that are on each of us in light of that year 1 reality, in light of that reality of abundance and also exploitation and decay.
Now, this is a hybrid program with busy schedules in mind, so you can attend the 4 yearly residencies in person or participate virtually. Between those gatherings, the whole cohort comes together online to process what's emerging. So, who exactly is this for?
If you have that feeling that there's more going on in our world and in our present moment than what could possibly be captured in news headlines. If you have a sense that there is a spiritual depth that you are hungering for, if you feel like there's a deeper love and compassion that might have the possibility of changing the world, or at least changing us, I think this program is for you.
Year 2 begins in May, and they're accepting applications now. If this is stirring something in you, if you're asking yourself, how do I live faithfully in the shadow of empire? Don't wait. Go to schoolofthespirit.org to learn more and to register. Again, that's schoolofthespirit.org. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back. Next, we're going to hear from a weighty friend named Fritz Weiss, who is well respected here at the Quaker. So well respected that he's one of our board members. Fritz is a member of Portland Friends Meeting in Maine. He's a former presiding clerk over New England Yearly Meeting, and he's been a Quaker for a very long time. So I wanted to pose the question to him. You're familiar with it by now. What do Quakers believe?
I think the first thing I would say is that the foundational understanding of Quakers is that God is present and we can all access God or the divine or light or the still small voice or whatever language we use for that we encounter in our lives, and that we encounter it directly, and that everything else sort of comes out of that.
One of the difficult things about explaining Quaker belief, says Fritz, is that words will never express the full experience of the faith.
And so we're trying to share something we know or are confident in that is really sort of embodied, and the language is always a little short. And so much of what friends say about belief is attempting to describe something that is that's almost indescribable. Oftentimes we'll talk about faith as acting in the face of uncertainty, of trusting that this is what we're called to do without knowing the outcome. That faith is that trusting in the face of uncertainty or of doubt, whereas belief is what we are confident of. Early Friends, one of the names for the early Friends was that we were the Society of Friends of the Truth, because we felt like we had encountered something that was true, that we could count on. And then we acted from that. And when we acted from that, we acted without certainty of outcome. And that was faith. You know, belief is like this. I have had this experience. I've had this experience of God in my life. And I know in my gut that it is characteristic of the presence and experience of love, and that it's available to all of us. Faith is then acting on that. I think that's the difference for me.
There are people who would call themselves Quakers who don't believe in God at all. So when you think of the still small voice, that wouldn't be divine for them. So how do you speak to that?
The language we use is an attempt to describe the experience we've had. And we choose different language, and the language is cultural. So early Friends in England used the language that was familiar to them and familiar to their communities, which was biblical Christian language. And they found in that descriptions of the experience that they were having. And I think that, unfortunately, that particular, that language that was authentic to early Friends is offensive to many now. It is carrying the burden of centuries of misuse of gospel, in my mind. And I think that every Quaker probably would say, when you asked what they believed, they would probably answer differently. But I would hope that there would be some recognition that we're all talking about our experiential knowledge of what we encounter in our silence together or our community together, for those friends who have a different form of worship, that we are there's a commonality of experience that is perhaps deeper than the disparity of words.
I guess I'm still trying to wrap my mind around just the variety of beliefs. So, an evangelical Christian Quaker, they're not going to agree with a Buddhist Quaker as far as what they believe. So what do you say to that?
I would hope amongst friends there's more willingness to listen through the words to the experience or the shared truth we're trying to affirm with each other, together, of North American liberal friends that defines Quakers, but it's the shared experience. So when you talk about the Quakers in Kenya or the Quakers in Cuba or the Quakers in Bolivia, their forms are so different than the quiet liberal North American Quakers or the evangelical Quakers in North America. So what we have in common is the understanding that we are experiencing God, or the divine, or the still small voice, or the inward light, or whatever label we can put on it that doesn't have too much baggage. But I think sometimes our form is mistaken for our essence.
For our final segment today, we're going to look at Quaker belief from a more organizational standpoint. There's a document that yearly meetings publish called Quaker Faith and Practice. It's also sometimes called a book of discipline. Unlike a statement of faith or a creed, which is very un-Quaker, it's a document that changes throughout the years. And although its purpose is not exactly to outline beliefs, it does, in some ways, give a yearly meeting stance and thoughts on topics such as worship and marriage. So I called up a friend who is currently working on Britain Yearly Meeting's next Quaker Faith and Practice, and I asked her to explain how it all works and how it relates to what Quakers believe.
My name is Jennifer Kavanagh. I live in central London, and my meeting is also in central London. It's Westminster, which is just near Trafalgar Square.
What brought you to Quakers?
It was in the wake of trauma, as it often is for people, that I felt I was cracked open and able to access another dimension. And I didn't know what was going on, but I had no choice but to pursue it. So I went looking at various churches which did not speak to me at all. And I remembered seeing the sign outside the meeting house at Westminster and thought I'll give it a go. And when I arrived, I found peace. And I've never left.
So here's the million-dollar question. What do Quakers believe? How do you answer that question?
Well, in common with most people, I dodge it. I think we all find it very difficult, mainly because ours is an experience-based faith, and everybody's experience will be different. Yeah, but that does not mean that anything goes or that it's a pick and mix kind of religion. It doesn't work like that. It's a very superficial way of looking at something very profound. And I think it's important to find the commonalities. There are some things we hold in common, which, we talk about there being that of God in everyone. But the word God is actually quite problematic for many people. So we can express that in other ways. We can talk about the inward light. We can talk about the divine. There's a whole spectrum of understanding about God, from the Christocentric to the universalist to humanist, whole variety. But most people can relate to there is something precious, something eternal inside us all that we can relate to, both in ourselves and in others. I think we believe there's no difference between the sacred and the secular. There's no division. We believe in continuing revelation, which is why we don't have a creed, because we might believe tomorrow something we didn't believe yesterday. And that all life is sacramental, that all humans are equal and all life forms are connected. Those are the things that I think of as what we have in common.
As far as the Quaker faith and practice, what role does that play in a meeting?
Well, it's not a holy book. We don't believe one book is more holy than another. It's a collection of witness and wisdom. It's an anthology of Quaker writings through the ages, and also a description of the current structures and practices of Britain Yearly Meeting. So there is the kind of church governance aspect, and then there's the anthology aspect. And it's an amazingly rich collection of wisdom. And how it's used in a meeting, well, most meetings will read from it regularly, particularly advices and queries. And it's used for reference for the church governance stuff, but it's also mostly used for inspiration, both for individuals and for meetings.
Britain Yearly Meeting's last Quaker Faith and Practice was published in the 1990s, and work began on the new one in 2018. Jennifer says they hope to complete it by 2030, so it's a lengthy process. I asked Jennifer what exactly the committee that's tasked with writing this new document does, and how they make decisions that will be relevant to the whole yearly meeting.
It's an incredibly complex matter because we're not just revising it, we are starting again. We are creating a new thing. And that will be partially a book, and it'll be partially online, and it'll be all sorts of things. And so we started from first premises, really. We thought, who is the audience? Who is this for? So for newcomers, for existing Quakers and so on, even for people of other faiths. Are we telling people what to do? Are we advising them? I mean, we've been working on it for 5 years.
There are 25 people on the committee who meet multiple times a year, both in smaller groups and as a whole.
Our job is not to make decisions. It is to follow the practice of the yearly meeting. It is tricky interweaving the spiritual with, if necessary, the legal. And very often we use anthology material, quotes from people to demonstrate the richness of the spiritual experience, but also, crucially, the diversity of it. I mean, one of the aspects of the book that is incredibly important is inclusivity and recognition of diversity within the yearly meeting. But after all, this is for the next generation.
So there's a balance of legal and spiritual concerns, advice and wisdom, which, as the topics are brought before the yearly meeting, get posted in both word and audio formats, such as this section on marriage.
Marriage is a lifelong, unconditional, and serious commitment. It is a spiritual union with important emotional, physical, and legal aspects. It joins two people who promise to be and to stay a couple. The declaration of this commitment is made to each other, to the meeting, to the community, to society, and to God in a meeting for worship for marriage. The Quaker community also makes a serious commitment to support the couple on their journey. They are married in the care of the meeting and in accordance with the law.
Are there ways in which the faith and practices do function somewhat like a creed would to give some understanding of where the overall body sits with different topics?
Well, for me, a creed is telling people what to believe. I mean, a creed is something that people have to sign up to. This is absolutely not that. It gives guidance, yes. It's a well of wisdom that people can tap into. And I hope that's how it'll be seen.
How important is it for friends to have their own set of beliefs?
On the whole, I don't talk about beliefs. I talk about faith, because my view is that faith unites and beliefs can divide. I think the crucial thing is experience. What is your own experience? And that any belief stems from that. The important thing is to be confident in your own language and tender with others in theirs. And I think that would apply to the beliefs as well as the language. And as for Quaker faith and practice, well, it's an extraordinary privilege to be asked to be on this. And I hope we can do it justice.
Thank you so much for listening. I know this episode was chock full of ideas and perspectives, so I invite you to hit rewind and re-listen to the great nuggets that were shared by our guests in this episode. We'd also love to hear what you thought of it and what your own thoughts are on faith and belief as a Quaker or as a non-Quaker. You can head over to QuakerPodcast.com to leave a comment. And while you're there, check out our discussion questions and a transcript of this episode. I'd also like to say a big thank you to our guests for tackling this question and being so open to share with our audience. Today's episode was reported, written, and produced by me, Georgia Sparling. John Watts co-hosted and also wrote and performed the music for this episode. Studio D mixed the episode. Your Moment of Quaker Zen will be read by Grace Gunklevsky. If you would like to support the work that we do here, go to QuakerPodcast.com and click that support button at the top right hand of the screen. Every donation that we get helps us to continue the work of this podcast and makes it more sustainable for the future. And now for your moment of Quaker Zen.
The pacifist is literally a peacemaker. He is not a passive or negative person who proposes to lie back and do nothing in the face of injustice, unrighteousness, and rampant evil. He stands for the fiery positive. Pacifism is not a theory. It is a way of life. It is something you are and do. Rufus Jones, 1928.
Sign up for daily or weekly Quaker wisdom to accompany you on your spiritual path. Just go to dailyquaker.com. That's dailyquaker.com.